I think we'll get started. It's 7 o'clock. For those of you who came out this evening, thank you very much. Welcome. And we really appreciate you coming. The agenda, I'm going to put up here in a minute, but basically two purposes to this meeting. One is that we share information that we think might be useful as we go forward to referendum on April 2nd. The second reason is get any question, any concern, any issue that you may have answered. And if we can't answer it standing here this evening, we will get it to you later this week. I've got cards up here for people to write questions and contact information. If you want hard copies of everything, if you want more information, we will get that to you. Because there's a lot of information here, probably more than most people want. There may be some who want a little bit more of what's in here or some background information, but overall, I think it's information overload, so I'm going to go through it rather quickly. Stop me if there are questions. If you have a question, stop me. The only thing that I may do is say, if you could hold on to that for 3 more slides, we're going to get to that one and it's going to be in context. That's the only thing that I might do in asking you to defer that question for a little bit. So we are here to talk about referendum to exceed the revenue limit. And we have what appears to be a fairly simple agenda. The why are we here? What is the revenue limit? Why are we being asked to approve? Exceeding the revenue limit, and what effect would the referendum have on our taxes? It appears to be a fairly simple agenda, but the topics are fairly complex. So we're going to start up here at 40,000 feet, and we're going to get down into some of those details that people usually ask about. If I don't hit the details that you want, raise your hand, jump up, let me know, and we'll get those to you. So this, the why are we here, is familiar to everyone. Why isn't my clicker working? My clicker is not working. No, I am just techno-cursed. I think. Now I got it. Maybe I just need to be in closer proximity or I have something interfering, an electromagnetic field. Sevastopol is a great school, and it is a great community with great support. Outstanding achievement, for those of you who haven't heard us say yet, Sevastopol was ranked 18th out of 424 school districts by Gannett Publishing in student achievement. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. 18th out of 424, regardless of size. It says a lot about our student achievement. Student participation in a huge number of extracurricular and co-curricular activities, an enormous number for a school this size. Community support, those of you who are here, and lots of other people that participate in booster clubs, in PTO, in all kinds of committees, in volunteering for turkey trot, everything, that volunteer with us during the day. We have a tremendously supportive community, and that's part of what makes this such a great school. Within the school, we have absolute focus on providing what students need for today and also what students need for whatever future they may choose. And that's an important piece to us because we're not real sure what every student is going to choose as they go forward and they leave us. Parents, teachers, we may try to get them in one direction or another, but we never want to do anything that will, sometime in the future, preclude a student from not being able to do something that they'd like to. So it is broad and focused entirely on making it possible for students to do whatever they want. And the last one on here is we have a real commitment to meeting the community's expectations. Our community does have expectations of the school, expectations of our student achievement, expectations of our staff, and we want to make sure that what we're doing is consistent with the community's expectations. Now here's the downside of why we're here. The first one was the good news. This one is the downside. First one, despite really serious actions taken in the past, that we're continuing today and that we're looking at as we go into the future, the revenue limit, and we're going to talk about the revenue limit, is simply not sufficient to meet what our projected expenses are. The revenue limit trends down, and our expenses, despite the reductions that have been made, still continues to trend up. With the referendum, programs and services can continue. And so that's the nuts and bolts, the money piece of the conversation that we're going to have this evening. Somebody suggested to me that I get this right out in front of everybody at the very beginning. Otherwise, people sit through, 10, 12, 100 slides and wonder, okay, but how much is it? How much is it? So I moved this up to the beginning, and I'm going to have it at the end as well, because this is the kind of question. What the referendum is asking is $1.15 million in the first year, $1.35 million in the second, and $1.75 million in the third. And what that does is, today our mill rate is $5.12. So it's $5.12 per thousand. With the 1.15, the mill rate is $5.11, goes down a penny. With the next year, 1.35, it'd be $5.24. And in that third year, $5.58. But people always want to know what that translates into. So, for a $150,000 property. Right now, we're at $512. The annual cost is $768. First year, that's that $1.15 million referendum. The mill rate is $511. Annual cost $766. It actually goes down $1.50. You can follow that down. 2014, the total difference is $18 more than the previous year. 2015-16, the difference is $69 more than the previous year. So the net increase over 3 years is $85.50, and that actually averages out to about $28.50 a year for those 3 years. And if you really want to break it down, it comes down to 7.4 cents a day, which I have rounded to 8 cents, okay? So that's how a $150,000 property would break out. Now this is, of course, assuming equalized valuation stays flat. All of those assumptions have to ride with this. We also did it on a $200,000 property, and since there's $50,000 more of value, the price is up a bit. $2 down the first year, $24 up the second year, $92 up the third year, for a net increase over the 3 years is $114, and the cost per day is actually 10.4 cents, which I rounded down to 10 cents. That, if you look at it over the 3 years, the cost over the 3 years is $38 a year, but it builds in to that final $92, or the 10.4 cents a day. So that is, all things being equal, the effect that the mill rate would have on the levy that we've been talking about to exceed the revenue limit, the referendum on April 2nd. Revenue limit, and that's the big piece here, that fascinating piece of Wisconsin finance. The revenue limit is the maximum that the school board is allowed to levy each year to collect through taxes. The only way that they can collect more than the revenue limit is to go through the referendum process that we're doing right now. The state has a formula. I'm going to go through the pieces of that formula so that you can see how we arrive at the revenue limit and why we're at somewhat of a disadvantage in the revenue limit. Here's the calculation. The big number is membership. Now, membership is different from enrollment. Enrollment is how many kids are going to school here. Membership is a bigger number. It's all of the students who reside in our school district. Some of them may be open enrolled to other school districts, but as long as they reside here and they're school age, they're included in our membership. So membership is the number, and it's a 3-year rolling average. That's important to remember. You're going to see how it affects some of our forecasts later. And depending on what your membership is, it can increase or decrease your revenue limit. For example, we get a certain amount of money, hypothetically, every year per student, and that's added to our revenue limit. So if you have more students, your revenue limit is going to go up. If you have fewer students, your revenue limit is going to go down. Next piece on there is exemptions. There are several kinds of exemptions. They're recurring and non-recurring. Non-recurring means you might get it this year, but you might not next year. Recurring means it's going to go on forever. In the big calculation, when you have passed a referendum to exceed the revenue limit, your levy is actually one of the exemptions. We go through here, you're going to see times in some of the calculations where the levy is included as one of the exemptions, and it becomes part of the revenue limit. Gibraltar, for example, the levy that they just passed in November is a recurring referendum, which means that that amount of money can be added to their revenue limit forever. What we're looking at is a non-recurring referendum, which means it's only for the 3 years that it says in the actual statement on the ballot. Another example, an exemption, is there's a declining enrollment exemption. We get some money each year based on, over a period of time, how much our enrollment has declined. So as long as we have declining enrollment, we will continue to have that exemption. It's non-recurring, but it's something that comes to us and is listed as an exemption, and what that actually does is increase our revenue limit. The third one down there is the per member allocation. We're going to talk about that in detail. Last one is state aid. We're going to talk about that in some detail too. Basically 2 kinds of state aid: equalized aid or equalization aid, and the special adjusted aid. And there's a thing you're going to see here on that. So, remember I said we were going to talk about membership and the 3-year rolling average? Whoa, wrong button. Too fancy. How do you like that laser point? Is that cool? You can see that our membership has just been up, 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 down, up, 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 down. And then starting in here, which is about 04, 05, 02, 03, we started this downward trend. Our membership, as it declines, meant that our revenue limit was becoming less and less. Now, we got a little money through declining enrollment, but through the formula, membership is down, and so your revenue limit goes down. Now, what you see here, darn, I'm sorry about that, wrong button. I'm the same way with the remote at home. Here, you can see we've got a little uptick right there, and that's because this year our membership was higher than it has been in past years. Because it's a rolling average, however, you don't see an immediate change in how much is coming or going in your revenue limit, because it's a 3-year rolling average. We also, as we make these projections, it's going to take a couple years for us to know if this is an anomaly or if this is actually the beginning of a trend. We know that we have an imbalance in our kindergarten and senior class right now, but we also know that we have 2 times as many 4K students as we have ever had before. So if those 4K students stay with us on into kindergarten and we get some other 5-year-olds that are coming into kindergarten, it's going to be one of the biggest classes that we've had in a good while. So we're watching this carefully, but until we get, I would say, 1, maybe 2 years more that are actually increasing, we're really not going to be able to label that as trending back upwards. So we're excited that it's a little bit, but we don't know how long that will go. So that membership is important. It's a rolling 3-year average because a whole lot of the formula is based on your membership. I talked about 2 kinds of state aid. There's the equalization aid, and there's special adjustment aid. Equalization aid is based on a formula that takes the total amount of property value in your school district and divides it by the number of students in that school district. Well, Sevastopol, Gibraltar, Washington Island have a lot of property value in their school district and have few students. So the way the formula works is that if, when you do that multiplication, if you're somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million per student, you're not going to get any equalization aid. Sevastopol is one of 20 school districts in the whole state that doesn't get any equalization aid at all. Southern Door gets equalization aid, Sturgeon Bay gets equalization aid. Well, there are only 20 of us that don't get any. Because we don't get any equalization aid, they throw us this scrap. This is the special adjustment aid, and they put it into the formula years ago, basically to say, you know, we really need to give those out of formula people something. And so they started with a baseline, and it decreases by 15% every year. Doesn't make any difference what your enrollment is. It decreases by 15%. So you can see, this is this year right here, 12-13. We're at about 51,000 here, and it's just going to continue to go down. We're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. We appreciate that 51,000, that 45,000, that 40,000 as it goes down. But it's nowhere near the millions that other school districts get in the equalization aid. All of the state aid, equalization and special adjustment, are subtracted from the formula as they do the revenue limit calculation. Because if the state's going to give you money, the state also isn't going to allow you to levy that in your own school district. So anything that the state gives you in state aid is subtracted from your revenue limit. It lowers the revenue limit, what you can levy. This next one is just kind of interesting. For years, part of the formula was $200 and some was added in the revenue limit calculation every year. So if you had 500 students, and the calculation included $200 per student, your revenue limit went up by, is that $100,000? $100,000. These years right here are all between like $230 and up to $276, I think, in here. And that was pretty common. It just kind of chugged along. And the reason for that increase per pupil every year was to accommodate for rising prices. Fuel goes up, heating goes up, electricity goes up, salaries, benefits, the cost of paper, the cost of pencils, the cost of buying buses. You know, costs keep going up and up. And so the state added in the formula cost per pupil that basically was to offset the increasing cost of doing business that school districts had. Then in these 2 years, 09, 010, and 10 and 11, it was a flat $200 per student for each of those 2 years. Then the bottom fell out. And this year, for the 11-12 school year, we not only did not receive additional money per pupil in the calculation of the revenue limit, they deducted $606 per student. So if you had 100 students, because that's the easy math, 100 students times $606 times another 5, which is about what we have, that's how much was deducted from our revenue limit. And when we look at the revenue limit chart, you'll see it kind of goes like this, and then boom, the bottom drops out of it. In this year, where the $606 was deducted. This year, this little bump right here, for this year, we got $50 per student. Now, one of our staff, Craig Siegel, was intrigued by this. And so he calculated, given where we are here, what's the average that we were getting each year for a period of time, and then you put that loss in, and then these short years. And what he calculated is if we were to get back on track from where we were here, that this next year they would have to increase the revenue limit by $1,624 per student, and we all know that's not going to happen. As a matter of fact, the budget that's under discussion right now is 0 additional per student in the revenue limit, which means the revenue limit would theoretically stay where it is right now. So, the allowable limited revenue, that's the revenue limit. In these years, you see that it goes up. Remember, we're adding the $200, $250, $270 per student to adjust for increasing costs. So the revenue limit continues to go up. This is just under 5.8 million. This at the height here in, this is 10-11, is 6.8 million. So it's up about $1 million in that period of time. Then the bottom drops out where they deduct the $606 per student, and it plunges. And it comes down again. In here, this is where we are right now in 12-13. This is our revenue limit this year without the referendum. This is the pure revenue limit. These 3 black bars here are what we forecast the revenue limit to be, doing with the best information we can get out of Madison right now, using current state law, using the trends that we see, projecting what our enrollment rate might be. These 3 black lines are what we project the revenue limit to be for the next 3 years, which are the 3 years that we're talking about in the referendum to exceed the revenue limit. Now, this I left as a blue bar over here because this is an out year. This year is not addressed by the referendum, and it's just going to be kind of hanging there as we work our way through the next 3 years. Someone asked, why do we just do a 3-year referendum rather than doing a recurring referendum like Gibraltar did? And you never know what the state's going to do. They might change the funding formula, and wouldn't that almost anything would be better than what the funding formula does for us now. So if they changed the funding formula, which increased our revenue limit, we would want to make adjustments as we went through. You know, the budget is decided in 2-year periods of time. They're talking about it now. We're going to know more about it by the time we get to July. Other changes will take place. But to try to guess forever, we would be much less accurate trying to guess forever than we are in projecting for the next 3 years. And so the decision was made that we're looking at the non-recurring 3-year rather than looking at a recurring referendum. We just need to know more about what the state's doing before we move further out than that. So these are the allowable limits. These are the 3 years we're talking about. You can see the difference in the revenue limit from here to where we were at these points in time. As funds, the revenue limit has decreased. As we have had challenges financially, a number of steps have been taken to reduce spending and to reduce costs. And also cost avoidance, which basically is you don't spend something that you'd plan to spend. You defer your maintenance. You don't buy something at all rather than move forward with perhaps a reduced cost. Most of the budget in any school district is staff, is salary and benefits. And the same thing is true here, it's salary and benefits. Since 2008, 10 staff have been reduced here at Sevastopol School. That may not seem like a lot to people who are used to bigger schools. It is a lot for us, particularly when you add that to the 16.55 who were reduced between 2003 and 2005. For those of you, an FTE is a full-time equivalent, so a 10 full-time equivalent could be 20 half-time staff. It could be 10 full-time staff. It could be partially full-time staff, partially part-time staff, but it comes together in an FTE. So since 2003, 26.5 FTE staff have been reduced here, which means that people had to pick up more responsibilities. Did that make a difference in our budget? Absolutely. But it also made a difference in the lives of staff as everybody had to do more. There's been a lot of conversation about health insurance, particularly as we move into new regulations on health insurance. And this summer, the final steps were taken to put together formally, legally, the Door-Kewanee Insurance Purchasing Cooperative, 9 school districts, Door and Kewanee counties, Through that cooperative, we were able to reduce our health insurance with comparable plans from moving from one carrier to another carrier, and I have to look, $178,807 for 1 year. Now, we started in January, and so we've got a half of that savings by the time we get to the end of this fiscal year. And then we've got next year at that same lower rate. So we already will have our savings for that by the time we get into planning for next year. But $178,000 is a lot of money to be able to not spend going forward in the budget. We also had a 7.1% decrease in dental care along with that. Now, we know, and you're going to see this as we start talking about forecast, that we have a guaranteed rate increase. It won't go higher than a set amount when we get to June 30th, 2014. It won't go higher than 12%. We also have a guarantee of some type that it won't, we've got 12% June 30th, 2014, and they've guaranteed it won't go higher than 18% more June 30th of 2015. Well, we do have the option, and this is part of what we're doing going forward, we do have the option to put that all out to bid again to see if we could get a better rate. And since we're now in this cooperative, there are a lot more of us. We're actually getting, good bids for the benefits that we offer our staff. So, big savings in health insurance, medical and dental. Retirement contribution changed as a result of Act 10, so that staff now all pay a portion of their contribution to the Wisconsin retirement system. And the savings was in 2011, 2012, and that saved us $139,000. Now, that's money that the district didn't spend, but it's money that staff then had to spend. It came out of their paychecks. It's not that it just went away or that the benefit changed. It's just that the cost was shifted from the district cost to staff cost, $139,000. I also talked briefly about cost avoidance, things that we have not done simply because we were trying to save money. We've deferred a lot of our technology infrastructure. We haven't purchased any buses. Put materials and supplies on hold. Salary increases have been nothing or minimal. Anything that comes up to be purchased goes through this process of, is it absolutely necessary? Is there anywhere we can get it cheaper? Can we defer that? What is it going to do? We weigh the cost benefit of every one. The last piece down here is contributions to the fund balance. And we're going to talk more about the fund balance on here. But as we go through and we save money through those economies that we create during our school year, which is comparable to our fiscal year, when we save money through that year, the money that's left at the end of the year that we've got left at the end of the year because we've deferred or because we've saved, because we've bought cheaper or we haven't done something, that money goes into our fund balance. And the contributions to our fund balance are important because it has allowed our fund balance to increase, which gives us some flexibility, and it also gives us the kind of stability that we need to do the borrowing that I'm going to explain through here. So the next piece is, how do we do the forecast? How do you figure out how much you're going to spend? Because you need to know how much you're going to spend in order to figure out if the revenue limit is sufficient or insufficient or somewhere in between. So we work with a company on the forecast. They make recommendations on increases for certain categories of things. And we force change some things that we know are going to happen. And all of those are illustrated through here. There's a 1.5 salary increase that's plugged in. Now, that does not mean that everyone is going to get a 1.5% salary increase. It could mean that some people get more, it could be some people get less. Determining salaries and how they fit into the new requirements of Act 10 is something that we'll be looking at starting in April, as soon as we're going to know. It's recommended that we use a 2% increase for utilities, materials, supplies, insurance. We caught a break. This year we went out to bid on some of our insurance and it went down a little bit. But since we bid it last year, it's probably going to go up at least 2% as we go into the next year. So we put a 2% multiplier on a number of things throughout the budget. We know that we need to buy 2 school buses to replace buses that are currently in our fleet. And basically we rotate them. You buy a new bus, you put that on our regular routes, and you take an older bus and you make it a spare bus. And spare buses we put out for auction or we hold for the last resort. So we know we need replacement school buses in 2013, 2014, and 2015, 2016. That's going to allow us to keep on our cycle of replacing those buses before they become too expensive to maintain. I talked about the 12% increase in health and dental that we're going to have, maximum 12% June 30th, 2014, and a maximum 18% June 30th, 2015. We calculated in there a flat equalized valuation. It could go up, it could go down. It needs to go somewhere, and it has been down this past year and up the year before. So predicting what it's going to do in the market that no one can predict right now, we left it a flat equalized evaluation. We used the best information we could get on what the state was going to do in funding. Now, state funding doesn't make a whole lot of difference to us, but how much they do per pupil does make a difference to our revenue limit, so we use the best information we can get. There are some purchases that we added into the budget because it's time. One is, I've got textbook purchases here, but it's not really necessarily the traditional textbooks. They could be e-books, they could be licenses, they could be online resources. All of the things that we need going through the next 3 years that are tied to the Common Core. Right now, we are required to replace our curriculum with Wisconsin's new curriculum, which is the Common Core. So we have to redo all of our English, math, social studies, science, and actually the content literacy from kindergarten all the way through grade 12. All of those content areas, all of those grade levels. It is a huge undertaking to do in this slice of time that we have to do it. We know we're going to need resources that will help our teachers with that new curriculum because it is very different from what we've been doing for the most part. We also knew that we needed to do some increase in technology because what we have hasn't been kept up as much as we would like it to be. We've got some great things that teachers do in technology, some even better things that teachers would like to do, but we don't have reliability, we don't have security, we don't have capacity, we don't have storage, and we have access issues with our current technology. So we know that we need to change what we've got in those data rooms to make it work. At the same time, though, we know that smarter balanced assessment, this piece right here, refers to the new assessment that the state is requiring, has unbelievable specifications for your connectivity, your internet, your endpoints, your storage. So what we're required to do for smarter balanced assessment has to be taken into consideration in technology. Educator effectiveness is a new required state program for evaluation of teachers and principals. The estimate right now is it will take each principal at least 40 hours to evaluate each teacher. Plus, we are required to use Teachscape, a system that the state has adopted that's web-based, that they say you need to use an iPad because it needs to travel with you to do it. So it's another technology piece. We have to pay the license for everyone. We have to get the endpoints for them to use, and we have to have the connectivity to make it work all over the building. That's the educator effectiveness. Student information system, some of you may have heard about this. The state put out to bid for a statewide student information system, and there's some unhappy people about the results. No matter what the state does, either rebidding it or taking the person that they had originally decided, we are going to have to change our student information system because it is neither one of those big people that are fighting it out in Madison. So we're going to have to do that whole migration from what we have to the new system, pay what the state requires us to pay. It's going to be another cost for training, for the migration, and for the cost that we're going to have to pay the state to use it each year. So we have all of these requirements and more. These things had to be included in the forecast so that we would have a good idea of what our expenses would be going forward so we can look at the revenue limit, the expenses, and figure out where we need to go from there. Some of these I've already talked about. Here are challenges, and actually this is priority order. Maintain quality and services and programs for our students. I mean, that is our priority. That's the focus. Yes, sir?
Why, if we're not getting any money from the state per student, why do we have to do everything that they tell us to do?
You know, you're not the first one to ask that question. That is unfunded mandates. Hear about it all the time. People talk about it all the time, and sometimes we don't talk about it very nicely. Every year, there are more unfunded mandates. This year, maybe in the past 2 years, there have been more significant changes and requirements added to the public schools in Wisconsin than I've ever seen in the 40 years that I've been working in public schools. And they are all unfunded mandates. Here's an example. The state is planning on giving each school district $80 for each teacher that has to be in the educator, well, let me see, I think I can go down here. In this educator effectiveness. So let's say we have, how many, 12, how many teachers do you have, Adam? Classroom teachers? Yeah, say 50 teachers. So they would give us $80, 80 times the 50 teachers that we have. Well, we're required as part of this to subscribe to TeachScape, which is an interactive, web-based observation, record-keeping, and staff development application. Yeah, it's got all the bells and whistles. So the state gives us $80. For the first year, they've negotiated with TeachScape that it's just going to cost us $80 for each teacher. But that doesn't include the $80 that it's going to take for Joe or for Adam or for me or people who are not on the cycle at that year. And there's no negotiated limit. The second year, we're not going to get $80 from the state. We're going to have to come up within our own budget what it takes to pay TeachScape to use that service because we're required by the state to use the service. Now, it's a good service. It's a really great product, and I'm looking forward to being able to explore it because there's some things in there that I wouldn't have expected it to be. I think it's great in terms of providing feedback and scheduling and putting together, whether you realize it or not, electronic portfolios. It is a really good tool for coaching and for ongoing continuous development of our teachers. But it's still required, and it's still unfunded. So these things that you see right here, those are all unfunded. This, the student information system, right now we pay for Power School. The state will decide on another one. The first year, the state has money in the budget, $15 million some dollars, to pay for the new student information system that they have selected. The second year, they have only $2 million. Where do you think the money's coming from to make up what isn't budgeted at the state? It's going to come from us. So we have to do it. And we simply have to figure out how we can pay those things that we're required to do within our increasingly confined budget. Is that a long answer to a short question? Sorry about that. So as you look at these, and this really is our, this is why we do what we do. This is why we, blood, sweat, and tears to figure out the budgets, to figure out the time, to figure out the resources, to do all of these things, is because this is what really counts. But these are the things that we have to do in the coming year and that are unfunded mandates. And this is something that we have to continue to pay attention to and that we're looking at very carefully to see what's the cost benefit and what are the steps and how can we get some help to address that facility maintenance. So these are our challenges going forward. Some of them are going to be reallocation of funds. Some of our Power School money will go into paying this, but we're not going to know for a while if that's enough money or not. We have some professional development funds that we can use in here and here as we train teachers. So there's got to be some reallocation. It's just getting more information from the state to figure out what we're reallocating to. Cost of fuel and the fund balance. Let me talk about the cost of fuel. Rock and I really worked on this. Fuel has increased 30% since October of 2010. And anybody that fills their car as many times a week as I do, you know that it goes up and down. But went back and looked at diesel, and the diesel's increased 30% since 2010. Well, if we were just driving one truck, that's an irritation. But when you're driving a fleet of school buses, we drive enough miles just in our regular bus routes to get to the moon every year. Not enough to get home, but we could at least get everybody to the moon. So you take that increase in the cost of fuel, the number of miles that we drive with our regular bus routes, that's a significant increase that we need to accommodate in our budget and pay attention to as we go forward, looking at if anybody can predict what the fuel prices are going to do. And the last challenge here is to keep our fund balance at a minimum of 27%. That's 20% of the expenditures in that year. It's an important number. It's a really important concept, and you're going to see why. We will continue to seek economies. These are the kinds of things that we've been doing because we didn't say, okay, we've reduced as much as we can, we're done. We are continuing to seek those economies. Collaboration with other districts. The Dorr-Kewanee Insurance Cooperative saved those 9 school districts. In the beginning, before people started taking other plans, $2.2 million for 9 school districts our size is pretty good, and that it saved us at least $178,000 is a good thing. That's collaborating with other school districts. We have the Door County Curriculum Council, where we share professional development. We can bring in speakers and share them, bring everybody into one place. We can use our own trainers. Basically, we've increased the number so that we have more of that economy of scale and are drawing on everyone's expertise. We also share some staff. We needed some additional speech pathologist time here, and Joe contacted Sturgeon Bay, and they had some flexibility, and so the Sturgeon Bay speech pathologist now works with us 2 days a week? 2 half days a week. We didn't have to go out and hire someone. We're sharing the cost with Sturgeon Bay. We also have shared programs. Really good example of that is the student-built home down the street, where it's the Door-Kewanee Business Education Partnership, and so you have both Door and Kewanee school districts that are working together with an instructor to do that. So the more shared things we can do, the more opportunities there are for our students, and the more we can leverage through an economy of scale. And so we are continually seeking those shared and collaborative kinds of services in order to achieve that. We're looking at contracting services and have been increasing that. We are looking at a different way of contracting our technology support. We have had discussions and really dove into the numbers on contracting our food service. And we are going to look at contracting transportation. Now, within Door County, various school districts have done those kinds of things, but everyone's in a little different place. It depends on what you want to achieve. And so as we look at those contracting opportunities or possibilities, it's looking at the cost benefit. Are we going to save money, and does saving that money make it worth losing or gaining this piece over here? So it takes some research, it takes a lot of discussion, some soul searching, and a lot of conversations, but we're going to continue to look at those contracting services. We also are in the middle of looking at some energy efficiencies through performance contracting, trying to we'll get opinions of performance contractors as to how much money we could save through energy efficiencies, and we'll look at what the cost of that fix is compared to how much we would save in that going out 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. When would it actually pay itself off? And so we'll work through that process, and that's a performance contract. Every budget, every budget request is analyzed. Who said you're going to start at zero. Don't just take the budget that you had this year and say, yeah, but I need more in this area. Look at the budget, zero it out. What are you going to do next year? How much do you think it's going to cost? And make sure that we have those numbers. A zero-based budget makes you analyze what you're doing and the decisions that you're making. And so we're asking people to do that this year so that it's not a cumulative budget, but it's really thinking that, I did this last year. I'm probably going to do it again in the coming year, but I don't need as much this because I have that. Or I'm not going to do that next year. I'm going to do this different thing, and it's going to cost more. It's going to cost less. Conversations with people in music. Cheryl. I'm meeting with Tanya this week because we've got all of these instruments that would be good instruments, but we need to have them repaired. And the repair budget is in Rock's maintenance budget. And so the distance between getting what the estimated cost for repair for all of those instruments over into Rock's maintenance budget is difficult. So we're going to start that now. What will it take to fix this, and this? And let's figure out what budget it needs to be in and then get it done as soon as we hit July 1st. Those are the kinds of things we analyze everything. Health insurance, we are going to continue to look at. We may have to rebid when we get to the end of our 12% increase. 18% might look real good if everybody else is looking at 36%. There is an unknown in health insurance and benefits. We still don't have the regs on the new federal health insurance program. What we have heard is it is going to cost small school districts more money than we anticipated. We've got a webinar sometime this month where they're going to tell us what the regs say right now so that we can start to plan the budget purpose and look at how we're staffing to see if that would make a difference. But the new federal health program is going to cost us more money than we had anticipated, so we're going to look for more savings here. And we continue to look at the benefits. Again, is that something that, how valuable is that? What's the cost benefit of that particular piece? Fund balance. We have a fund balance for two reasons. One is that we have to borrow money every year. We don't get any equalization money. Remember, we don't get any equalization aid from the state. If I'm this school district and I get equalization aid, they're going to send money to me in July and in August and September and October, which means I've got some cash coming in that I can use to pay my bills. But here we are in Sevastopol. We get no equal. We get $51,000. That isn't going to get us through July. We don't get that state equalization money in, but we still have to pay our bills. So we borrow every year. And that borrowing, we usually get settled in October. we can figure out very closely how much we're going to need to get us from that beginning part of the year to when the taxes come in January. We don't have any cash until the taxes come to us in January. And so we borrow in October so that we can pay our bills through January. The January money comes. We don't really pay back that loan until we get to the next October because it's so cheap. It tides us over when we need to be tided over. So it rolls. The loan is for about 13 months. Because we have to have a loan to pay our bills, we've got to basically have a good credit report. We have to have collateral. And they're not very interested in our building. What they do want to know is if we've got the cash. And so that cash, that fund balance, is what allows us to get a good rate for that short-term borrowing every single year, and we've got to do it. The second reason, emergencies and unexpected required expenditures. We need to do something with the roof. Flood, anything that would happen to the facility, the boiler goes, we're going to have to spend money that's not in our operating budget in order to fix it. We also occasionally have some pretty significant student needs that were not budgeted. Student needs that we have to meet. Having the fund balance allows us to do that when we have exhausted all of the other ways that we might be able to meet that student's needs within the existing budget. So that's our emergency. That's our nest egg. Needed to borrow is our collateral, and it's our nest egg for emergencies. Come on. There. The people who do our books, who work with us on our borrowing, and who work with us on our forecast model, say 27% is your magic number. You need to have 27% of your expenditures sitting in your fund balance. That's what you need to get the good rate on your borrowing each year. That's the kind of cushion that you need. So we shoot for keeping 27% in the budget. So knowing what the revenue limit is, knowing what we've done to reduce expenses, knowing what we're going to do to continue to reduce expenses, and what those challenges are, we get to basically the decision point. And that was, here's the forecast, here's the revenue limit. We need this much money to make ends meet. How are we going to do it? So we start with option one. Where's my little red dot? Here's my red dot. Option one said, okay, if we did a referendum to exceed the revenue limit by $1.15 million, we'd still have to dip into our savings. This budget deficit is what's coming out of the fund balance. Rather than increase the referendum amount, we said this is reasonable to take out of our fund balance because it will leave 35.51% in our fund balance. We're okay. Then when we get to 14-15, let's keep it at 1.15 million. We're going to have to take more out of our fund balance because our costs are going up and our revenue limit is going down. We're going to have to take more out, but it leaves us at 29.25 of fund balance. We were still okay. But then we get to this third year, and if we just did 1.15, we'd have to take $845,000 out of our fund balance in order to bring our revenue limit and our revenues up to the level that our forecast expenditures are, and that would drop our fund balance down below 27%. It'd be 17%, which is too low to get the rates that we need to borrow. So we try another way. Stick with this 1.15 the first year. That stays the same. Second year, take it to 1.35 million. Take $240,000 out of the fund balance in order to get enough money to meet our forecast expenditures, and we've still got 31.76 in the fund balance. So let's try that 1.35 again. Means we're going to have to take 645 out of the fund balance, and our fund balance has dropped below that magic number of 27%. Let's try it again. 1.15, we know that works. Bring that over, take 250,000 out of fund balance, leaves our fund balance okay. Take the 135 in the referendum, take 240,970 out of fund balance. It leaves our fund balance at 31.76. Take this up to 1.75 million. Still going to have to take 245,000 out of the fund balance to meet our expenditures that year. And the fund balance is at 27.12%. And so it is right where it needs to be. If we did this for the referendum and took this much out of the fund balance, it would meet our forecasted needs. Now, the forecasted needs, and there's another chart that you're going to see. Remember, we said that in our rates are going to change for our health insurance. Beginning July 1, 2014. So we know that there's going to be a bump in health insurance that year. We need a new school bus in 2013, 2014, so that's somewhat of a bump in that year. But when you get to 2015, 2016, this year right here, we've got a school bus and projected rate increase in health insurance, 18%. So there's a double whammy in this one. That's how the forecast works. Any questions on this? Oh, and actually, I did this last time too. Adam or Joe, these are these things so people can really see them. Can you? I forgot them again. Thanks, guys. All right, so this is what it looks like when we spread it all out, and this goes all the way down to 2002, 2003. This is the revenue limit in the blue, and the red is the referendum to exceed the revenue limit. And what we've done here is this is the year that we are in right now, 12-13. We're right here. And we are finishing up the last of 3 years in your second revenue limit. These 3 years here, this piece, and this piece, those 3 bars are these 3 years that we're projecting. Blue is the revenue limit, red is the request to exceed the revenue limit. Here's a bus, here's 12% increase, here's a bus, and 18% increase. Now, remember when we talked about fund balance? Fund balance is an important part of our whole financial health. You wouldn't really analyze your own financial health if you didn't include the money you had in the bank or the savings bonds that you had or what you had over here in the TSA. That's an important part, and that's what our fund balance is. So let's look at it a different way. Let's add the fund balance at the bottom, and you can see how we've built the fund balance. It was lower than we were comfortable with here. So every year we've taken money from the previous year and put it in the fund balance, money from the previous year and put it in the fund balance, so we could build it to the levels that you see here. So when you put the fund balance in, this is the revenue limit, and this is the referendum to exceed the revenue limit. When you put all 3 of those things together and you look at 13, 14, and 15, it's not a lot of difference in there. And actually, these 2, when you add the fund balance pieces in, these are lower than we are here. Your whole financial health picture. This one, we didn't put anything on here because this is outside of the discussion, the referendum that we're talking about on April 2nd. Because if we tried to balance it here, our fund balance would be down here, and I mean, it'd just be. But we don't know what's going to happen with the funding formula. We don't know what's going to happen with the budget. Heard that there was discussion today that every school district would get $1,000 per pupil, that would be guaranteed from the state. Heard another one that there would be $3,000 per pupil. heard that they would increase the per pupil amount for the revenue limit to 200. They're all over the place on it. So trying to predict here in these 3 years is touchy. Trying to predict outside over here, it's impossible. We're not going to go there. That's why we're going for this 3-year non-recurring. Is everybody with me on putting the fund balance and the revenue limit and the referendum together? I saw you smile. Thank you. Okay, next. This is another way to look at it. Let me do this quickly. It simply was an explanation of when you've got the money in the fund balance in 13-14, when you have to dip into your fund balance over here, your fund balance is going down plus your referendum amount is going up. And then in the following year, you can see your fund balance is down even more, your referendum is up more because the amount that's the revenue limit has gone down. Joe?
Dr. Hope, could you go back to that bar graph slide? I just want to see if I'm interpreting. So I'm looking at 2011, 2012, and
Here.
that was at $10 million roughly. So in effect, if I'm interpreting it correctly, we are actually taxing the district less in 2012, 13, 2013, 14, 2014, 15. So we are actually taxing the district less during those years because it's slowly dropping. But the reason the referendum amount is going up is because our revenue limit continues to decrease.
Continues to decrease. And taxing people more, that gets tricky because it all depends on that equalized valuation. Our equalized valuation decreased this year in the fall, when we got the reports in the fall. And so our mill rate had to go up a little bit to compensate for that. Because remember, the referendum is for an amount of money. It's for $1,150,000, $1,350,000, $1,750,000. And so the equalized valuation and what the mill rate is set at, the mill rate is set so that you come up to that 1.15 million, 1.35 million, and 1.75 million. But that's the story, Joe. I mean, that captures it. And as we get into these 3 years, this revenue limit is just pathetic. And, of course, at the same time, we're digging into our savings account. We're digging into the fund balance. Not a lot, between $240,000 and $250,000. But it makes me glad that we built up a healthy fund balance because that way it's that much less that would be included up here in the request to exceed the revenue limit. Put it away for a rainy day. It's raining. Okay? Let me get through these. Go. Okay, talk about mill rates because you move from, this is the amount to exceed the revenue limit. That translates into mill rates. Then mill rates translate into your actual tax bill. Here's the mill rates since 1995-96, and it was in here that the state enacted a whole lot of legislation to try to get property taxes under control. And so it goes down, 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 down. Then we get to here. 08-09 is the first year that Sevastopol had a referendum to exceed the revenue limit. And so you had 2 years, 3 years, we've had 5 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 5 years, and we're ending, this is the year that we're in right now, and these next 3 years are the ones that we're requesting permission to, your approval, to exceed the revenue limit. So, yeah, you've had some mill rate up and down in there. It's certainly, none of it is up to the level that it was in 04, 05, 02, 03, or anything up here. It's stayed pretty steady given the fluctuations that we've had in state funding. Another way to look at it. This is this year's mill rate. I did not project next year's mill rate because you've got people at different places in this process right now. Gibraltar has the lowest mill rate in the entire state, by far. Gibraltar and Sevastopol are 2 of those 20 school districts in the entire state that don't receive any equalization aid. So as you look at these, and these are this year's mill rates, Gibraltar passed a recurring referendum in November, and so theirs will go up a bit, I believe, when they start the next year. We're requesting approval this year. Southern Door is going this year. Denmark is going this year, and Sturgeon Bay is going this year. Now, the others, I don't know if they're in like the second year of 3 years or if they have recurring referenda, but I do know that Gibraltar, Sevastopol, Southern Door, Denmark, Sturgeon Bay, Washington Island, that we're all in the same boat this year. And 3 out of the 20 school districts who get no equalization aid, Gibraltar, Sevastopol, Washington Island, we all are going for a referendum on April 2nd. Any questions on this piece? Okay, this is a sample tax bill. In this tax bill, it tells you, this is the number right here. This is how much your property's worth, because that's your land and the improvements. And then it goes down, and here's what you pay the state, Door County. This is from Jacksonport, so it's town of Jacksonport. The vocational school, this is Northwest and WTC. And this is Sevastopol School. So this is the one that we're talking about right here. So for this particular tax bill, which was this year, this taxpayer paid $974.28 to support Sevastopol School. But there are 2 other pieces of information on here that I find fascinating. This piece right here that I have circled, it's the first dollar credit. And in the mid-2000s, this was added for property tax relief. This piece over here, the school levy tax credit, is older, and there was some dissatisfaction with how the school tax levy credit was distributed and to whom it was distributed. So this piece here, this first dollar credit, came into being, and it was a way of giving back to taxpayers in school districts that didn't spend a lot of money, didn't support the majority. Right now, because we don't have equalization aid, almost every penny that supports our school comes from our taxpayers, either in the regular levy through the revenue limit or in the permission to exceed the revenue limit. Other school districts get millions of dollars, and so they don't have to levy as much for their school. So there was some dissatisfaction, and so this was added. Sorry. This is subtracted right from here, so that this is how you come up with this. Both this first dollar credit is subtracted, and the lottery and gaming credit are tracked. But this first dollar credit is derived 100% from the amount of the levy and the property taxes. So even though this says here you're going to pay $974, take $33.78 off of it, because that's taken off your whole tax bill. This piece over here is even more. This one, if you can't see it, the school levy tax credit here is $200.66, and this actually is taken off your bill before everything is put together. So on here, even though the tax for 2012 is $974.28, there really is credit on here for $234. So you could take this and subtract the $234. That's what really you're paying towards Sevastopol School, because these things are credited back and actually picked up by the cost of the state. The state pays those costs. It's interesting. This is calculated by taking 3 years' worth of levies and dividing it by the state levies across the whole state, and then coming up with a multiplier and the number that the states decided to put into this particular tax levy credit, and that's how they come up with that number. So, first dollar credit and the school tax levy credit are both ways to give you property tax relief because of what you pay for your school levy. Any questions on that? Okay. We're getting there. Said I'd review. This is where we started. The request, 1.15 million, 1.35 million, 1.75 million. The 511 is actually a penny less than we have right now. This 524 for $150,000 home, what is it, $16? The 558, if you do this for $150,000 home, you get to the bottom line, you're talking about an additional $28.50 a year, or by the day it comes to, what, 7 point some cents, 8 cents, rounded up. If you go to the $200,000 home, it's 10 cents a day that is going to support the permission to exceed the revenue limit. Here's the summary: 1.15 million, 1.35 million, 1.75 million. April 2nd, standard voting locations. Only the voters of Sevastopol can make the decision whether permission is given, whether you give approval for the schools to exceed the revenue limit through the levy. And this is what the ballot looks like. It's really easy. It says exactly what we've been talking about, and you say yes or no. Any questions? I can't believe everybody sat through all of that. That's incredible. Questions? Yes, Claire, thank goodness.
So when somebody says, why don't you dip in to the fund balance, it is accurate to say we are in a conservative manner while still maintaining it.
We're dipping into the fund balance as much as we possibly can and still maintaining that 27%. We have to have the 27% by the time we get to the third year. It's 27.12%. That's about as close as you're going to get. So yeah, it's between $240,000 and $250,000 a year. So that's your answer. Thanks. Other questions? Yes, Leaf.
On a positive note, right in the very beginning, you talked about Sevastopol being ranked somewhere according to Gannett. Can you explain that a little bit more and what that's about?
It
How
really-
we fit into the other schools?
Yeah. Gannett Publishing, and what some of you may have noticed it by is that was it this fall, November, December? Sometime this year, they released salaries of people. And they went through community colleges, University of Wisconsin, they went through county government, and they did schools. And so that really was the headline news, where they talked about the average salaries based on all of the public schools or the average, Well, buried in that data, they had not only ranked by average salary, but they had also ranked by size, which is fairly easy to do. And they had ranked by achievement. Now, their methodology in putting achievement together to come up with a single number to rank may be suspect. But I'm going to take it because it said that when we rank from number 1 through number 424, every public school district in the state, Sevastopol is 18, and we beat everyone. Everybody, I'm sorry, that sounds really militant, but we beat everybody in the county, everybody in the region. I mean, the only schools we didn't beat were, the Kohlers. So, yeah, 18th in the state. And Gannett did it, so it's all our hands off. They did it with data that the Department of Public Instruction provided. And, yeah, 18th. Plus, I mean, you know, more realistic maybe. Although I can see it 18th because we don't have, you know, highs and lows. We've got this continuous growth thing going. The state issued its new report cards for the first time this year. It was a little nerve-wracking because nobody really knew what they were going to look like, what kind of questions people would have on them. We sat through long trainings to go through how they had calculated all of these various scores to come up with a number. Our 3 schools were all rated as exceeds expectations. And you really, there are 5 ranks, and exceeds expectations is here, and significantly exceeds expectations is here, and there were, I think, 12 school districts that ranked here. All of our schools, all 3 of our schools were exceeds expectations, and we felt great about that because it was the first year that they had changed the cut scores to be so much higher. Yes, we had, it was, I can't remember, it was the middle school or high school missed significantly exceeds by 1/10 of a point. And part of the conversation in Madison right now is paying the schools who hit exceeds or significantly exceeds expectation. Yes. Yeah, all conference schools at the secondary level. I mean, we have really high achievement. But balanced with that is this unbelievable number of activities that kids can participate in. And it's not just high school students. It's not just athletics. It's art, it's music, it's drama, it's academic kinds of things. I did the DI competition on Saturday, and you've got, you know, elementary through high school kids there. And there's always something going on. And there really is something for everyone. Pardon? 7 out of 8 teams advanced to state. Yep, 7 out of 8 are going to state. Okay, you want to do a little happy dance there? I saw you. I have a representative from DI here tonight. Yes, Claire coached. They were so good. Oh, gosh. So we've got great things going on. We want to keep those things going on, but we've got all these challenges that we have to balance at the same time. Yes, ma'am?
One of the questions I got today was, well, can't we just cut a lot because Joe's retiring?
That's half the budget.
I was like, huh? Didn't make a lot of sense to me because I know you're not making 1.3.
We've,
Will we be able to reshuffle and save any significant dollars by reorganizing the
you know, Joe's really not that overpaid. And yeah, you know, we might. And we've had the discussion about, you know, the number of administrators, because I do know that 3 years ago there was conversation about having 2 administrators instead of 3. Since that time, remember that list up here of everything that the state has added? We've got the whole Common Core, we've got Smarter Balanced Assessment, we've got Educator Effectiveness, we've got the Student Information System, we've got this Special Ed Transition thing. Pardon?
RTI.
Yes, RTI, forgot about that one. At the same time that revenue limits were being decreased, all of this new, really comprehensive, significant, good stuff, but all of this stuff at the same time we were given to do. So, for example, educator effectiveness. Principals, superintendents, we have to undergo some training to do that, and we actually have to be certified to use the TeachScape. And it's about an 80-hour process that we have to undergo this summer. Then we have to train staff in what this new educator effectiveness piece is. Then they estimate that it will take each principal 40 hours for each staff member. Now, Adam, were you talking 13 hours the other day?
13 evaluations.
And how long did you say it took to write them up?
It's about 4 hours a piece just for the Sunday report.
Okay.
But that doesn't count the pre-meetings, the post-meetings, the actual observations.
Yep, the actual observations.
Observations,
So 40 hours more is what they're talking about.
Also keep in mind, you've got other schools that have a business manager and a special ed director.
That's true.
And all these other
Yeah, we wear
positions. Well,
hats.
our business manager, our special ed director, we see them as superintendent and principal, but you roll all of those other positions up. And I mean, that's a difficult thing to do, to specialize in several areas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Joe?
One other aspect, and that's a real good question, Claire, because we hear that also. Me living in the community hears that also, too. There's been two local school districts, Gibraltar and Algoma, who have tried to reduce their administrative, the amount of administrators they have. Algoma typically had 3 administrators plus a part-time director of special education. Gibraltar, for the last 2-3 years, have been working with a 2-administrator concept plus a half-time director of special ed. Now, both those schools, Algoma last year, it might have been 2 years ago, went back to a 2 principals and a superintendent, 3 administrator, full administrator. They found reducing that just did not work for Algoma. Both school districts are similar. And Gibraltar, in effect, I think has it on their upcoming school board agenda to look at splitting off the superintendent and principal job that's rolled into one right now and having a separate elementary principal, separate superintendent, separate 712, might be 612 principal, and a half-time director of special education, 3.5. So both have tried reducing. They found it hasn't worked, and now they've moved back up to the original 3 administrator modeling for a school district our size.
And census-wise, Algoma, Sevastopol, and Gibraltar are fairly
Very
similar?
with the
Very
amount of
similar,
students in the school.
Thank you.
And I don't think, 3 years ago, when there was, conversation about 2 administrators, no one ever would have dreamed what the state was going to say here during the last couple of years. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. We are an anomaly to start with. We are not the typical school district. We're 1 of 20 that gets nothing from the state in equalization. The more typical school districts, and because I looked at some of the data for Sturgeon Bay and Southern Door, and their amount of state aid has decreased appreciably, and they have relied more heavily on state aid than they have their levy. And so Sturgeon Bay this is their 4th levy, I think. Anybody remember? I think it's their 4th. This is Southern Door's 2nd. I think people held on as long as they could, but you finally reach the point where there's just not enough money coming to the school district without going for that, revenue limit. Trying to, I had these organized ones. Sturgeon Bay and Southern Door both receive state aid. They do not receive state aid to the same proportionate amount that Luxembourg, Casco, Algoma, Denmark, any of those school districts do, because the land, the property in Door County is more valuable than in some other places. And it's how the state and then locally, how that property is valued that determines your ability to pay. And since we have a high property value, we are determined to have a high ability to pay, despite the fact that 40% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. And that juxtaposition of property wealth and income poor is very difficult for people outside of the door to understand. But it's what all of us here live with, all 5 school districts.
Plus, it's a way of transferring the decision-making process from legislature to. And they don't have a good track record as far as making decisions.
Well, and there's a lot of talk about efforts and statutes that are intended to reduce the property tax load of the local taxpayers. But for us, it works backwards. And that, I think that when we had the conversation with Representative Bice, I think he got that. I don't know where it is. Check it out and let's. Other questions? Let me show you these pictures. This is Sevastopol. This is how much money we receive in primary, secondary, and tertiary. And what it means is state aid is represented by yellow, okay? And there's no yellow, no equalization aid. This is Sturgeon Bay. So Sturgeon Bay gets primary and secondary, but does not get tertiary. And so Sturgeon Bay gets about this much state aid, and that's about $7,500 per student. This is, oh, that's Sevastopol again. Here we go. This is Algoma. And remember, the yellow is your equalization aid. And so if you compare Algoma to Sturgeon Bay, you can see Algoma gets tertiary aid and gets much more equalization aid than even Sturgeon Bay, and there's no point in even comparing Sevastopol to that one. This one is Luxembourg-Casco, and they get primary and secondary, but they don't get tertiary. But they get, you know, a good amount of state aid. This one, I actually shared this with Patty Vickman from Southern Door, and she said, "Where do you get that? I've got to get a copy of that." Because this tells a story for Southern Door. This is what Southern Door's state aid looks like. It's not nearly as much as people think it is. So they're all good kinds of things that you can find. Oh, this is Gibraltar. They're just like us. Any other questions? I do appreciate everybody coming and being so patient.